If you're new to working remotely at home, or you're new to managing people who are working at home, let me share with you a few quick, simple tips that you might want to keep in mind. First, trust can become a big issue. If you're a manager and you're used to managing by walking around, you can become uncomfortable with the fact that you can't see your people. And on the other side, if you're a remote worker and you're not used to working at home, it's easy to fall into bad habits and not staying focused on your task. One of the best ways to address these potential trust issues is to make sure that tasking is clear and your commitments to completing your tasks are clear, and how you report issues and progress. You know, when we're seeing our manager or our manager is seeing us every day, informal mechanisms to communicate tasking and task status often work. But when we go remote, these informal mechanisms can easily break down. As a result, we may need to add a little more formality to this process. So consider things like a task management tool, or at least having the task written down and clear rules on how you report issues and progress. Addressing these potential mistrust issues early can help avoid more serious problems, which can quickly happen when your team is working in a remote fashion. Now, even if you have good tasking and status mechanisms in place, there are going to be times when people have questions and you have to have discussions. When we're all together physically in the same location, these kind of meetings often just take place around the water cooler, or when the worker just stops by the manager's office doorway and chats. So now what we need to do is kind of set up what I refer to as the virtual water cooler, or the virtual manager's doorway. If you're the manager, think about setting up rules for when different kinds of communication are appropriate. Obviously, email, texting, chat. Now be careful here, because there are certain areas where those mechanisms are appropriate, but they can be abused. I'll give you a little more on that later. Also, you're going to want to let everybody know when the formal meetings are. And if you're going to have regular status meetings, how are you going to communicate? Is it phone, teleconference? Are you going to use Skype or a webinar? Get that out. You know, one of the interesting things we find, I don't know what the culture in your organization is, but you're thinking probably you're going to lose productivity when your team goes remote. That isn't always true. I have heard a lot of my own clients come back and say they become more productive, because you can use this as an opportunity. If you have a culture where you're constantly getting interrupted and your people are having trouble getting work done, this allows you to put some structure in place where by working at home, they can actually become more productive, because you have a plan in place for when the meetings are, and you can actually reduce a lot of interruptions. One more point on this. If you're a worker starting out to work remotely and your manager isn't doing this, just remind them how this can help and why they should put these rules in place. Remember, this may be new to everyone, so work together to set up those rules so that your team can work well together and possibly even become more productive working remotely. I mentioned a little while ago that I would say more about email and texting. Keep aware of the drawbacks of these types of communication. They are not synchronous mechanisms. There's no guarantee they can be dropped. Also, you miss a great deal in the printed word from body language and voice intonations. I have seen these mechanisms cause teams, people go off and start thinking the wrong things. I sent him an email yesterday. He's ignoring me. Well, maybe it went into his spam folder. Maybe he's just out for the day. So there's a lot. The rule I like to say is use these mechanisms for very simple communications where the answer is something like yes or no, and when you don't need an immediate response. Otherwise, get on the phone, or even better yet, get on a tool where you can see the other person you're talking to, where you can clarify things, where you can, if it's a sensitive issue in particular, you need to do this. You still have to go to work. Now, I know this may sound a little crazy, but if you haven't worked remotely before, you need to set aside an area in your house, which is where you work. And it's best to have this away from where there are other distractions. This is important because you need to get into a routine. You should get up at the same time you normally would get up, do what you do, and when you normally would leave your house and get in your car or however you go to work, you go to that area of your house where you will work. It's important to minimize distractions. So for example, don't have this area near where the TV is. And just another example is if you get phone calls and they're personal, don't be afraid to tell people you're at work. You'll have to get back to them after you get out of work. Again, it may sound crazy, but you need to get into the discipline of doing what you normally do and recognizing this is work and it's separate from your personal life. Similarly, you still have to leave work. And I also suggest that you leave work, leave that area of your house when you normally would leave work if you had physically gone in. This again is important. You need to separate your work from your personal life. Now, there is an advantage to working at home that eventually you can do some flexing and do some personal things during the day, but I don't suggest you do that at the start. You want to get the routine down first. And if you do start flexing in the middle of the day, you should keep a log of your hours so you don't start shorting the job. Also, if you do that, it's important to alert anyone, in particular your boss, if you're going to be gone for a certain part of time. This gets back to the trust issue. Especially at the beginning, you don't want your boss calling and finding out you're not there, you're out on the golf course when he expected you to be at work. The last tip that I'd like to leave you with isn't something that's unique just for remote workers, but I think it's particularly important when you're working remotely. And that is to set aside enough time at the start of your day to plan your day. Plan the tasks you want to get done and allocate hours to each. It's okay not to get everything done, but I suggest that people start out with a task they're confident they can get done so that they set the day going on the right note. And you certainly want to do early in the day time critical things that you really need to get done. And then also set aside enough time at the end of your day to debrief yourself, to look at how you did against the plan. This is particularly important to see if you're still able to get your work done. And as I mentioned earlier, you may find you're more productive because you're not getting those interrupts that you might be getting when you had to go into work. So that's good to look at it, to assess it, so that you can share that information with your boss as to how productive you are at home versus when you went into work. I would also just like to conclude this by saying that the first book I wrote was 20 years ago, actually 19 years ago, 2001 it came out. It was titled Virtual Project Management. A lot of what I'm sharing with you today is in that book. 20 years later, what I wrote then was true. It's timeless information. It's equally as true, if not more so, today. I hope some of these tips have been helpful to you. If you want to contact me or you have any questions, my contact information is on the last slide after this presentation. Thank you.